Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to get started in this book launch of our newest book in our COVID learning series called I Have Questions. We're really thankful that you joined us this morning. It's our first morning event and our first, one of our second book launches that we've ever had with Pangea Educational Development. My name's Drew. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Pangea, and I'm excited to kick things off with you today. We have a few things that we want to share with you about both our work, about this book, and about all the folks that have been here to help make this book possible. And so if you haven't met Pangea, maybe this is your first time, maybe you've read one of our books, but you don't know a little bit more about a lot of the work that kind of happens on the back end of things. Our mission is to create culturally relevant content and programs that help children learn to read and inspire them to read more often. This work and this book in particular is made possible by Cigna Foundation. Cigna for more than 50 years has been bringing Cigna's mission to life in local communities and around the world, seeing the importance of health, especially mental health, in a time like now, a time like an ongoing protracted pandemic has never been more important. And Cigna was excited to get on board with us with this project. Of this book called I Have Questions. And I Have Questions focuses on a lot of things, and we're going to tell you about quite a few of them this morning as we dive in. But as we do, I just wanted to introduce you to one of our co-authors. I don't write very often, but this is a book I helped out with. But when I do write, I write with Taylor Toman. And so Taylor's on with us today. Taylor is a name and probably a face that you might be familiar with. Taylor was the co-author of one of our first books, The Unwelcome Stranger, in our COVID learning series. And Taylor joined back on with us to help us write this book again. So Taylor, welcome to the event and welcome to the Pangea community.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Drew. Thank you so much for the warm welcome and for having me on today. This was definitely a passion project of ours that, I'm just happy to see come to fruition and to the finish line. It is really something that we're very excited about. As Drew mentioned before, we've written together before and collaborated before. And for a little bit about my background, I am currently a PhD candidate in the anthropology department at The Ohio State University. I specialize in specifically understanding health disparities as they pertain to Black women's health. Specifically, my dissertation research will be focusing on understanding how Black women who are community health workers are navigating with risk of exposure to COVID-19, both in their professional and personal lives, because I'm very much a champion of intersectionality theory and critical race theory, and thinking about the various ways that our identity influences the decisions that we make for ourselves, but also understanding that everybody has multiple roles. No one person is one thing, and understanding the ways in which those different roles and identities intersect in ways that, put us in specific environments, but also give us various different opportunities in life. So that's just a little bit about, what I do and how it is that I sort of came to be a part of this wonderful project. Is me and Drew, as we mentioned before, have written together, and I think we do a really good job, at least as far as me being in, higher education and academia, and Drew being very more grounded in understanding the ways in which education works and how children's minds work. We try to take complex situations and feelings, right? Because that's a part of being a parent, which I am. I have a 4-year-old son, he'll be 4 in August. Try to help them tackle very hard emotions, and specifically thinking about, COVID-19, right? That was a major shock for a lot of children, because children usually thrive off of, schedules and consistency, and all of that went out of the window for everyone. So being a part of this project, specifically this book, I Have Questions, is something that I think will be very helpful, at least as far as a tool, because that's really what, I appreciate Drew and Pangea in general for doing, is creating various tools that parents can use in conjunction with forming stronger bonds with their kids. And that's sort of the reason why we sort of came together to sort of try to tackle something as large as, let's say, misinformation. How do you talk about that with, a child in a way that's meaningful and that's helpful and that will help them understand, but not just understand, but critically think about what's going on around them? Because as Drew and I both know, children see and understand a lot more than we give them credit for. But these books hopefully provide parents and kids opportunities to take advantage of, those opportunities that, we can really help our inquisitive minds flourish.
You can see we absolutely found the right person to help us write this book. So Taylor brings an amazing academic lens to some of these larger issues that we're talking about in this really complicated times that we're all experiencing, right? And so I guess, Taylor, I'd love to interview you a little bit. You can always feel free to interview me back. Taylor's really good at pushing and asking other questions whenever I ask her questions. But I guess you spoke a little bit to this, Taylor, but I guess we made the first book, and if you haven't had a chance to read our first book, The Unwelcome Stranger, it introduces what COVID-19 was. It's a really abstract concept, and it was hard for a lot of folks, myself especially, to understand what was going on. It was this thing that we couldn't see, we couldn't smell, we couldn't hear it. It was a really complicated virus. And so we released that at the very beginning of this pandemic in April of 2020, which feels like a couple of years ago now, I think. I agree. I think everyone could probably resonate with that. And so I guess, Taylor, like, why did you want to come back and do another book? And I guess what specifically about this book, tell us a little bit about the plot, maybe tease us a little bit with it.
Well, as far as introductions, right? Like, so we were talking about COVID, right? But we were also introduced to Jasmine and her world and her family, right? So this wonderful character that, we're also sort of very much tied to, at least from a personal perspective, like thinking about the ways in which my son and my nieces and my nephews were trying to figure out, so why can't we see you? Like, I thought you were coming for birthday parties. We thought you were going to be here for Christmas. What's happening? Like the endless FaceTimes and trying to, figure things out, but also explain what was happening to children in meaningful ways. Because what I've found through raising a soon to be not anymore toddler, but young kid, if you don't explain something, at least in a way that, on the surface covers all the bases, there are going to be several follow-up questions that will eventually get you to what it is that they originally wanted to know, which is what's going on. So I think, at least as far as this book is concerned, this idea of having questions, but also there was just last year just a slew of information that we were just given, right? And everybody was trying to figure it out and tease apart what was going on. I think, at least with this first book, we're really trying to wrap our minds around, okay, as adults, we understand, having to micromanage things and compartmentalize and try to sift through information, but that's a skill. And that is something that over time we've all learned how to do to some capacity, right? But children learn from us, and they have to have examples and opportunities to be able to hone in on those skills. And I think this book, at least as far as, understanding Jasmine and, the age of technology, right? Where it's like they have iPads, they have access to so much more information than I remember having access to when I was their age. So just a little bit to tease about the plot, she's exposed to some information that makes her feel unsettled and, confused, right? Which I think a lot of us felt that way as information was coming out. I'm feeling unsettled, confused, trying to figure things out, and we have strong, emotional reactions to that. And I think it's important, and specifically throughout, these books, to really showcase and highlight the importance of community and those around you, because it really is the people who are the closest to us that, specifically for children, those are the ones that they feel comfortable asking these questions, or even saying, hey, I have a question, or can you explain? Because that is, that's how we show vulnerability. That's how we try to show growth. And I think throughout the story, we really see that support system and network help not just, guide or tell her what she should be doing, but help her come to those conclusions organically on her own. Because as I said before, these books are tools, but also showing that process. And I think, at least as far as when we were thinking about this book process and understanding that sometimes that's messy, you know what I mean? Sometimes it, doesn't make sense. Sometimes um, it can be overwhelming, but knowing and understanding and providing support for parents and for children, I think is crucial when it comes to helping people get to the other side, which is what Jasmine ends up doing. You know what I mean? Oftentimes we feel like we're alone and that we have to figure all the things out on our own. But we don't. We oftentimes have people in our corner that will be there for us if we just simply are vulnerable enough to ask the question.
Well, and if you have a toddler, I think we all know how many questions can be asked on any given day. So this book might be helpful in the process too. I think one of the intentions that we tried to place from an educational standpoint was how to ask good questions, because all questions are good, but some questions are better than others at helping us understand what we're trying to understand, right? And so, it's one area that I would love to go, Taylor, if you're okay with that, because I think we were really, really intentional about what that looks like, and in an event like this, for folks that showed up today, we really want you to be able to see a little bit under the hood of kind of what went into that. So I'm going to show a little bit of a diagram that that Taylor and I had worked on when we were kind of putting together this book. And before you let your eyes get so confused, some of the things that have gone into this, we're trying to figure out the different emotions that we were feeling, right, Taylor? I guess I want to maybe go to the emotions on the side. How did we kind of come up with this list of things to decide what we were going to try to address?
So really sort of honing in on the ideas of like, so the question has changed. Originally it was like, wait, what? What's going on? But this idea of confusion, because I think a lot of us were confused about what was going on. And that's a strong emotion. Depending on, the person, you can either get angry about it, you can get overwhelmed by it, you can be, some people are excited by confusion because they're like, ooh, what's going on? There are a range, of emotions that you can have. But I think the one that we really wanted to hone on was really just genuine confusion. And I feel like children are a very good indicator for just genuine emotions. And you see that with Jasmine. You see that while she's, it's Nandi did a phenomenal job illustrating and capturing confusion, but also it was important to, infuse the fact that, we live in a digital world, and the ways in which, we could have a whole nother seminar on like children and technology and the ways in which that shapes, their emotions and the ways they respond to things. But I think getting to what that question was, because it was important for us to start with emotions, but I think those questions were also something that we really wanted to focus on. Like, I have a question, like, I'm confused, like, what's going on? And then to move to, so what type of question type is it? And it's really about her getting to a place of clarity, because I think that's what most of us really were looking for, right? Like, as we were fumbling through 2020 and now that we're here in 2021, trying to still find clarity in various different aspects of our lives that were put on pause or that were slowed down. And children are a part of our world. So they understand like what's happening. So moving from clarity onto like the themes of like, some things are not in our control, right? What is in our control and what is not in our control, usually there's a big gap between that. Most of the things that you can control are usually at the individual level. But as we see, you know what I mean, Jasmine very much uses and has access to a support network, specifically her aunt, right, who is there with her to help be a sounding board for her to just verbalize that confusion. And then, okay, so what do we do with these emotions? And like, okay, we take that confusion and we try to tease apart. So where's this coming from? Okay, well, this is why I feel this way. Okay, what's another healthy way that I can try to get some clarity on what this means? Because that's the biggest part, right? Like, identifying is great, right? But we can't just stop at identification. We have to, the process and as I'm learning in higher education and through this process of a dissertation, like it's one thing to just, have mass data on like identifying things, but what do we do once that we see what is there is
Right.
what's important, right? That's that next step. Can't
Yes.
just
Yep.
identify.
Application almost, I think, right?
Exactly.
And that's where, I mean, well, that's what I think is interesting. And so like, I think folks will see across the screen here, there's not only the emotions, but there's a model of a question. And then there's the type of question that it is. And this is something that most folks don't dig into very far. This is something that we know that educators are going to find really useful in the classroom when they use this book there. It's one thing to ask a question, it's another thing to know the type of question that you're asking. And so a lot of educators right now around the world, as we talk about 21st century skills and critical thinking, inquiry is a big part of that. And teaching kids how to ask the right questions or a better question to get the answer is critical to that as well. And so one part of that is something that, what we call sort of this critical pedagogy, basically. And so there's a line in the book that I love, and we're going to get to reading a little bit of a snapshot of it. We're going to get everyone a sneak peek this morning, but you can't possibly hope to get the right answer if you're not asking the right question. And how true is that, right? How many times have you thought you're trying to ask the right question, trying to get the right answer, and you've just been asking the wrong question the entire time? And so that's something that was in our mind, because I still have questions. I don't know if anyone else watching today does as well, but as we're doing this book launch, we're just a little bit more than a year and a half into a really long pandemic. And one of the things that is still happening is there's still things changing every day, in the United States where I am and where Taylor is, and where I think a lot of folks who are on today with us are, folks do have access to vaccines today. Folks do, mask mandates are shifting, but that's different in every state and every country around the world. And so kids realistically have questions about these things, and adults do too. And so, what I found reading this recently was, it was a little therapeutic for me too, as I was reading just as an adult through some of these pieces. And so there's something that at Pangea we have on the very far right-hand side called our wisdom figure. You'll often find in all of our books, somebody is providing some level of wisdom, and we try to model who that person can be and how they can approach those questions as well, because it's okay to not know the answers. I think part of the, and Taylor, I don't know if you've ever been in the situation where you don't know an answer to one of your son's questions. But how do you handle that? And I guess this is a question for you too. How were we trying to model this, I guess, in the book, with how to answer some of these questions?
So the first question, it actually had me, at least as far as the person of wisdom. So I, born and raised South Side Chicago, very strong Black mother, very much a woman-led household. So questions and, that was something that I always had. But conversation is something that we definitely did every day, every night, decompressing, trying to understand the world, us talking through and connecting, right? And I think I'm so glad you bring up that quote, because one of the greatest signs of wisdom is knowing and accepting that you don't have all the answers, but that you're willing to either one, find it out, or two, be supportive, or allow others to support you in a way that'll help you get there.
Right.
And I think that's one of the most valuable lessons that I've learned, at least from my mother and my grandmother, is, not necessarily getting so caught up in the, the end goal of wanting to, I gotta do it now, and really truly being present and engaging in the process. And that's something that I've really, becoming a parent, is something that I've really had to be more intentional about doing. And I know a lot of times, people talk about intentionality, but like for everyone that could mean something very different. For myself, as far as like questions, how do I how do I show or engage with my son when I don't know the answer? Quite simply, I let him know that I'm a human. Mommy doesn't know everything. And I tell him, if I don't know the question, if I don't know the answer to his question, I tell him, you know what, Tenderai, that is a really good question. Let's try to figure that out. I'm glad you asked that. Mommy doesn't know, but let's see if we can figure it out together, because then it becomes something that, okay, you've identified something that you don't know, but that I also don't know. So let's, instead of not knowing together,
Mm.
combine our energies and resources to figure it out together. And I
Right.
think, that not only teaches him, that yes, mom, I'm your mother, but I'm also a person. But also it also teaches him a level of coming to terms with, our own invincibility. I think when they're children and when we're young, we have this idea of like, well, you know, I can do all the things and I should be able to do all the things. And then sometimes, usually, they're met with a lot of frustration when they don't go their way. But if
Right.
we could just instill in them that, hey, that's a part of growing up. You're identifying something you can't do. Now let's grow and learn something that helps us tackle that problem. And looking at, challenges and things, not so much as just, a burden, but an opportunity for you to be able to change and to grow. Because at least for myself, I know it's usually harder to identify those things that challenge us and that make us feel uncomfortable, and see them as something, as an opportunity when we're in them, right? Because we're in them.
Right.
But
Right.
oftentimes all it really takes is just to take a breath, which is what Auntie Nikki asked her to do, like this. Ooh, let's take a breath, let's take a beat,
Right.
and let's rethink about this. And I think that taking a breath is something that a lot of us had to do last year, right? We had to, I oftentimes remember, at least in, you get into squabbles and talking about, what are some ways in which we can change all the things, right? But like the biggest rebuttal to that used to be, well, you're never going to get the world to just stop. um but it did last year for a little bit, at least. So I think, helping, getting back to what you were saying, at least as far as with how this is very much married to this project, is that we can't all have the answers to everything. But what
Right.
we can do is create tools that have enough plasticity, that have enough flexibility to allow people to engage in them with meaningful ways.
Right.
Everyone who reads this book is going to have a different background, a different experience, a different life history that they
Mm.
bring to interpreting what's happening between Jasmine and her family as they go through what a lot of us have gone through, continue to go through, sometimes have to revisit, but that's what the tool is for, right? We don't just, use our toothbrush once and put it down. We come back to it every day, and every day there's something else that we, have to, wash or learn, you know what I mean? So using and looking at these books really as tools to, revisit and come back to, is something that I think is really important, at least as far as, helping children and parents feel less alone or on their own, when it comes to dealing with a lot of these complex um, issues that we've had over
Right.
the past year.
Well, yeah, and I think one of the things that we tried to be really intentional with doing was just, you'll see under the wisdom, having different figures, because we're all different people in our lives. I'm Uncle Drew to some people, and someday I'll probably be daddy to another one, right? And even different ones of us are grandparents, right? And so I think trying to model that, hopefully, for all the different kids, because kids reading have different folks who are in their lives and who aren't in their lives. So one, I think being able to see a normative example of someone and how they can support you, but then also for the adults, showing ways that you can show up for kids too, I think was one of the things we tried to make sure that we placed when putting it together. So one thing I would love to jump into, for folks that are on the call, we want to give you the sneak peek. This is a book that is now available on Amazon in the US, and will soon be available next month in Uganda through our office there. But we wanted to read one of the stories, because within this book, it's actually the longest book we've ever made, for this level. It's about 70 pages long, and it has 5 different short stories asking these 5 different questions throughout it. And we thought we'd read one with you today, to kind of get a snapshot, before you try to get a tangible copy in your hands. So we're going to click into some of this, and Taylor and I are gonna read through here. But there's a section at the very beginning about this book, and it says, questions are important. We ask questions for a lot of reasons. We ask them when we want to learn things. We ask them when we want to help or when we want help. And we also ask them to understand ourselves and others. We have a lot of questions every day, but especially lately. As we write this book, the world faces a great deal of uncertainty during the COVID-19 pandemic. Each day we are learning more about the virus and more about how to protect ourselves. Sometimes the answers are clear, sometimes they are confusing, and sometimes the answers change, which is also confusing. This is a book about questions and the power of asking good questions. And although all questions are good, not all questions are equal. You can't hope to get the right answer without asking the right question. Asking good questions help us understand the things around us, the people around us, and ourselves. This book is a collection of stories that follow a girl named Jasmine and some of the questions that she has right now. We hope this book will answer some of the questions you might have, but also share five styles of asking good questions and when they can be helpful. We hope you enjoy reading, and we hope that you enjoy asking your own good questions as well. All right, so about the COVID-19 pandemic. Right now, we all may feel like we know this background, but we're hoping in a few years that many kids won't have to know about it. So the background for now is COVID-19, or the coronavirus pandemic, began in December of 2019. Virus has quickly spread from country to country, causing danger and spreading fear around the world. And you can see our figure, the unwelcome stranger, flying around the world. And if you've read between multiples of these books, you'll know that the map is changing based on what's happening in the world at the time. And you'll see our good friend, the sun's face, changing depending on what he sees going on as well. So the first story is Wait, What? Asking questions for clarity. Clarity questions allow us to pause a moment and ask for understanding, especially when we hear something that gives us a strong emotion like surprises, something that's exciting, or even something that is scary. Look for Aunt Nikki's clarity question. So we're going to read this. Taylor, I think you'd be a better Aunt Nikki than I would be. I'll play the child.
Okay, no worries. Jasmine, are you crying? What's wrong?
This isn't going to be over for another 5 years?
Wait, what? Who told you that? Oh, Jazz, this is just clickbait.
Click what?
Clickbait. When headlines, visuals, or captions try to trick us to click links, but do not support the content.
Oh, what do you mean?
Let me see. Here you go. This is clickbait 101. A big, scary title to get you to click on it.
Doesn't it scare you though? I mean, what if it's true?
You know what? That title does scare me, but we have to be skeptical when we read or hear something that makes us feel a strong emotion. Look here, the story does not say anything like that. First of all, they don't tell us which scientists or why those scientists are the ones we should believe. Then they say that a vaccine could take up to 5 years. That does not mean it will take 5 years. It also doesn't mean parts of life will not return to normal by then. You see, this advertisement right here, they wanted you to click the link so they would get paid for you to view this ad. That's all. Sometimes the way information is presented to us can make us feel like we are alone in a dark room and the world is against us. But light is always just a reach away. You just have to turn it on.
Oh, I love that. And so this was something that we were really, really excited about. It's a good example of one of the many stories that dive into some complicated topics. And for a lot of the world, when we're talking about vaccines, there's a story in there that talks about the process of making a vaccine and the full process of getting it to people. So one of the things I think we're all feeling hopeful about probably is the prospect that we can protect ourselves through a vaccine right now. And so I think what you'll see is we describe each of the steps to try to make that more understandable to everyone reading it, the kids especially. And so, one of the things that we're talking about right now are just the like the distribution, and where our home office is in Uganda, we're not expecting widespread distribution for another couple of years. And that's a very different reality for different kids in different places. And so understanding some of this, I think there's some good critical questions that we're asking as well on who does this affect? How does it affect me, but how does it affect others, and why is that different? And we're not here to necessarily answer all of those questions, but we simply want folks to be asking those questions themselves and exploring the answers themselves and what they mean themselves. I did see a comment in the chat, and if you have any comments or questions while we have Taylor on with us today, feel free to drop them in there. The illustrations are beautiful, is what it said, and we totally agree. We work with Nandi Fernandez. Nandi is an incredible artist, and she does art for everything from video games to children's books to animations and everything in between. She's been one of the best partners that we've been able to have. And so if you've been following the COVID Learning series, Nandi has been illustrating all of those, and she's constantly jumping time zones. So we're hoping to get her on one of these calls at some point soon. But we totally agree, and I think we'd all. I think Taylor would probably agree too. She's really fun to work with in the process of making these.
You definitely made the visual of, because the entire time, at least for this first story, right, they're in the dark. And so is Jasmine, right? She's confused, and that is a part of emotion, right? So Nandi did a phenomenal job, really trying to highlight and showcase that emotion, and tying it into the words, because towards the end, as you see, with the support of Auntie Nikki, Jasmine is brought, she's not fully there, but she's on her way to getting towards a better place. And I think a lot of us are really, that's what we're hoping for, right? To find tools, to find resources, to find people that help get us from the sort of darker, confused places in life and can pull us forward in a process of, getting towards a better place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's a great example, especially for that story, Taylor, because it was really dark. And I think we all may remember times where we were, hiding in our houses for a significant portion of the day and only lit sort of by that glowing screen. And so you'll see that throughout it. I mean, it's everything from different analogies that we've written using plants and growing and what things are important for someone that's healthy to grow to be their best self, to moments like that, sort of in the darkness, and Nandi kind of catching, how to use light in particular to kind of show emotion as well. So we will open it to any questions. And if anyone has one, feel free to type it into the chat. But Taylor, as we're kind of closing up here, we just want to thank you. Thank you for all of the work and all the time that you put into this. I know that being a PhD student is not easy, from what I've seen. I also know that being a parent is not easy. And so the additional time that you've offered to us to, to be part of this has been really, really wonderful. So we really just appreciate your work kind of supporting this book, but also what Pangea does all the time in general.
Oh, thank you so much. The feeling is completely mutual. I don't know how you run all the things that you do, and keeping track of all the people that that you are in charge of. But I really do appreciate being able to be a part of such a wonderful project. Specifically, for my own kids. I'm currently 7 months pregnant, so trying to wade through that. Thank you. But I think, having these books is definitely something that I'm very proud of, to be able to have, more tools and information for them to, see themselves, and for other children, as you mentioned before, not everybody has the same exact situation. Like, a lot of kids here will be more in closer to the light a little bit than other kids who have to wait longer to get exposure to a vaccine or to any other resources that would help them flourish. So I think, as I said before, having this tool that helps people think critically about, okay, so why is this, or what's going on, or how can I better tackle the feelings that I have, is important, and helps, again, also the parents, because the parents are very important to this problem. The parents and the teachers and the other support people that are there for our children are important for them to also have resources, so thank you for providing this resource.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. I mean, and this is for anyone else that's watching. We are always looking for authors with ideas that want to help communicate them to kids. And so Taylor volunteered a lot of time to help us with this, and we're looking for other folks. And if you have a topic that you think is in the back of your mind, it might be something, whether you just want to share the idea with us or whether you want to co-write something with us and kind of join Pangea's efforts in a more substantive way, we invite you to. Always feel free to reach out in the many, many ways that you can get a hold of us, from social media to our website, to more information that we'll put in the chat below. Thanks everyone for joining today.